10 years. 10 years ago from this very day, one of Nintendo's most beloved and longest running franchises made the trek outside of Japan and over to Western audiences for the very first time. Welcome, my friends, to the 10th anniversary of Fire Emblem's localization. Indeed, the same year that Fire Emblem Awakening was released as a celebration of Fire Emblem, so too does today mark the first decade of which the series has been brought over to worldwide audiences. It's hard to believe that it's already been 10 years since Fire Emblem crossed over to our shores, but I'm getting ahead of myself. Let's back up and start from the beginning, shall we? Ahem. In 1984, Nintendo founded a little studio called Intelligent Systems. And by little, I do mean little. When it first started off, Intelligent Systems was a one-man team that went by the name of Toru Narihiro. Narihiro-san was responsible for converting Famicom disc titles like Metroid into the standard ROM format used on NES cartridges. Over time, this one-man team expanded into an entire programming unit responsible for fixing or programming Nintendo software. In 1990, Gunpei Okoi and Shoso Kaka came together with Intelligent Systems and the Nintendo R&D1 team to create a game that combined RPG elements with their then-new War series. That title would eventually become the first Fire Emblem game ever made. Between making new entries in the Fire Emblem series, Intelligent Systems would go on to make bigger projects like Super Metroid and Paper Mario, but the series itself remained fairly unknown to the West, despite its popularity in Japan. While there was an American release of the Fire Emblem OVA on VHS, there was never an official release of a Fire Emblem game outside of Japan. So what convinced Nintendo to finally bring over the series to the West? Well, it was all thanks to a little game that you might have heard of. It was called Super Smash Bros. Advance Wars. Sorry folks, Super Smash Bros. Melee is not the reason why the series was finally localized. The popularity of Marth and Roy in Melee is undeniable, but it was the success of Intelligent Systems' other strategy series that would convince Nintendo to begin releasing these games here with the release of Advance Wars on the Game Boy Advance on September 10th, 2001. Their inclusion was certainly a contributing factor and got a lot of people interested in the series, but the inclusion of Marth and Roy in Melee was one which Nintendo wasn't originally even considering. In fact, the only reason that they included Roy was to promote the next game in the series, Fire Emblem Fuenos Tsurugi. The Smash Bros. Series certainly had its part in drawing people's attention to cult classics like Earthbound and the Starfy series, and while Super Smash Bros. Melee was the title which exposed these two characters to Western audiences, the popularity of Marth and Roy in Melee is insignificant compared to what Advance Wars did for the series. In an interview with Edge magazine, one of the directors of Fire Emblem, Kentaro Nishimura, revealed some interesting information about Advance Wars localization. With Advance Wars, even though there wasn't a plan to release it outside Japan, we made it really easy to play. We put a really good tutorial in so people didn't have to read the manual, and when the US marketing people played it, they came to us and said, "But this is great, why can't we sell it over here?" And it seems that Advance Wars' success shifted Nintendo's attitude over Western tastes. In other words, without Advance Wars, Nintendo would have never considered localizing the Fire Emblem series. So, can we put this long-standing myth to bed that Melee was why they started to localize these games? After Advance Wars received massive critical acclaim with high sales to boot, Nintendo decided that now was the right time to bring the Fire Emblem series out from under the land of the rising sun. There's not a whole lot of information on the actual development of the game, so much as there is about the promotion of it. Nintendo made it more than just a game. It was an event. This was the very first title in one of their longest running and most revered series coming over to the West, and Intelligent Systems designed the game with that Western audience in mind. In order to avoid confusing people who never played a Fire Emblem game before, Nintendo took a page from Final Fantasy with their 7th installment and simply called it Fire Emblem. At least in North America and Europe. In Japan, it carried the subtitle Rekka no Ken, which translates to The Blazing Sword. Speaking of translation, there were a few changes during the localization process, like Lynn's age being changed from 15 to 18, some enemy characters receiving name changes, but the only major changes to the design were several enemies having their stats tweaked to make the game easier, and reinforcements wouldn't appear until after the enemy phase ended. To help promote the game, a bonus CD, which included special items and 2 songs, was included in every pre-order of Mario Kart Double Dash. A terrible commercial followed suit.
No man can be trusted. What happened to Dorcas? I put poison in his mutton.
Build an army, trust nobody. Fire Emblem, only on Game Boy Advance. Rated everyone.
Game Boy.
Yeah, trust no one. Hey, random stranger, wanna join our ranks? I don't trust you. But you can join if you want, I guess. On November 3rd, 2003, Fire Emblem was finally released, receiving critical acclaim from critics and gamers alike, becoming a bestseller on the Game Boy Advance and the highest selling title in the series, until Awakening that is. The question is, after a full decade, does this game still hold up? Was it any good to begin with? Well, let's celebrate this momentous occasion by taking a look at the very first title in the series to ever be localized with Fire Emblem. The story is, when you get right down to it, very simplistic in Fire Emblem. It starts off as a retelling of the first Fire Emblem game, but with a twist. A long time ago, dragons and humans lived together in peace and harmony.
Then, everything changed when the Fire Nation attacked.
Okay, obviously that's not what happened. Humans started a bloody war against the dragons known as the Scouring. Led by 8 legendary heroes, they defeat the dragons who, now humbled, disappear from the land as humanity spread its domination across the land of Elab. Now, that's all just backstory, which is interesting enough to build an entire game around it, but instead, the plot of the main game focuses on 3 different, interconnected stories: Elowood's Tale, Lynn's Tale, and Hector's Tale. The main character, Elowood, is searching for his father after he mysteriously disappeared along with several of his men. One twist unfolds after another, and soon you'll find yourself in the typical "you're the hero, save the world" story that you've come to expect for the genre. So yeah, the plot isn't breaking any new ground, but what exactly about it works? Are the stakes high? To our characters and to us, yes, they are, but the plot remains focused on making sure people don't learn about the main conflict. In stark contrast to Awakening's operatic tale spanning multiple continents, and in spite of taking inspiration from one of the most famous chansons de geste ever written, Fire Emblem takes place in the small land of Elab and keeps the scale to a minimum. You don't even explore all the regions it has to offer. Some territories are never explored. Is it full of unexpected plot twists and turns? Not really. Like a good mystery novel, the clues are there for you to figure out the twist yourself. It's more of a matter of when or if you can put them together. So what is it about the story that just fits together so well? It was at this point, after asking that question to myself, when I realized what the focus of the plot was about. The characters. The strength of the narrative comes from the colorful group of characters who you'll come across and how attached you'll get to them. It's a character-driven epic whose actions are the main focus of the story. They really grow on you the more you get to know them and learn about them. Their strengths, their weaknesses, goals, and ambitions. You're sure to have your favorite out of the massive 44 characters that you'll meet. Even the main villains are very well developed. They're not just evil for the sake of being evil, they're just living the only life they know as a family, and fighting for what they believe is a just cause. And that's to say nothing of the many other characters throughout the land that you'll encounter that make the world they live in all the more worth saving. For the first game localized in the series, the translation is well done too, and the plot holds up even after multiple playthroughs. It also does something that is vastly underutilized in games: using the gameplay to tell the story. A character meant to be strong or portrayed as a skillful assassin has that trait reflected in either their stats or in the actions shown using the game's mechanics. In an age where every new game aspires to fill its narrative with expensive cinematics over actual substance, conveying the plot by using gameplay is a breath of fresh air. From a game made in 2003. Sometimes, using the mechanics of a game can do as much, if not more, to develop your characters than a few lines of dialogue. All of this is just one of the 3 stories Fire Emblem tells. There's also Hector's Tale, which is a slight retelling of Elowood's Tale with the main character changed from Elowood to Hector. Hector's Tale reveals a few events that weren't known in Elowood's own, but it's not quite as strong since it takes away the focus of Elowood's own personal struggles in favor of his own, which, while more personal and relatable, have absolutely no bearing on the plot. Still, it's an interesting addition that fleshes out Hector's character and shows the sacrifices that he made to be with his friend, along with some exclusive characters and content worth that extra playthrough alone. There's some truly powerful moments and rich themes here, with a heavy emphasis on regret and reflection of one's previous actions. Essentially, the story amounts to this.
Ow! Jeez, what was that for?
It doesn't matter. It's in the past.
Yeah, but it still hurts.
Oh, yes, the past can hurt. But the way I see it, you can either run from it or learn from it. Ah, you see?
You may be wondering at this point why I haven't mentioned Lynn's Tale yet, but don't worry, we'll touch upon it later because it has both Fire Emblem's greatest strength and one of the worst features in the entire series. Fire Emblem's story is not some grand triumph of the human spirit, and it never was meant to be. It's simply a well-told story with endearing characters accompanied by rich themes and a wonderful lore, built from one of the best chansons de geste ever. Few games can claim to have managed so much and seamlessly married its gameplay and story at the same time, as well as Fire Emblem. Fire Emblem is a tactical RPG in which you control a group of units around a map to complete the objective of a given chapter. The objectives change from chapter to chapter, but can generally be classified as defeat your opponent and keep your casualties to a minimum. Before battle, you spend your time preparing your allies by giving them new items, taking away old ones, and choose which units to take with you for a chapter. When the battle begins, players move the unit across a map and choose what action to take with it with every available unit, ranging from attacking to healing, or going up to an enemy and having a friendly conversation in the middle of a battle. Once your turn ends, the enemy will take theirs, other units follow suit, and some reinforcements may appear. Rinse and repeat. It's not as deep as, say, Path of Radiance or Awakening, but the simplicity works in its favor. It rewards patient and tactical strategies as you nurture units and create supports on the field while completing the objectives as best as possible in the forms of items and weapons. And you're going to need all the items and weapons you can get, since your weapons will break after using them too much, and you can't just keep buying the most powerful weapons and start slaughtering foes without spending a hefty amount of gold. You have to manage all of your resources and characters and plan out your turn to determine the best possible route to take for a given situation. The best of these rewards, however, are neither gold nor blade, but the guidance chapters. By completing a special task in the previous chapter, you can unlock some extra parts in the story. These chapters vary in terms of narrative, sometimes giving backstory to a certain character that I dare not spoil, while others develop the main characters. What's more, they don't feel like they're unnecessary or contrived, they flow with the rest of the story. There's also factors to consider like weather and fog of war that help keep each battle interesting and makes you choose between units best suited for a given map and units you want to use in a chapter. A tough decision, especially when there are units that you can recruit. In many chapters, you'll come across a unit, enemy or otherwise, that, with the right unit, you can talk to and convince to join your side. This adds yet another layer of choice of who to bring along in a new chapter, and how to get them close to talk to them without killing one another. On several maps, you'll find a village or houses to visit, where you can get items, coined, or just learn about the citizens of a life. But you'll have to be careful that bandits and pirates don't destroy the villages before you can get there. It provides a good incentive besides coins and items, and you really do grow to care about these people. They're just ordinary citizens living their lives while you just happen to be on the battlefield. You don't want to see any harm come to them, either from the looming threat of the main antagonist or the bandits or pirates on the map. It makes you want to carefully plan out how you'll reach them before the enemy does. Again, marrying the gameplay and narrative together. On the subject of relationships, when two units spend enough time standing next to each other, they can initiate a support conversation and gain a boost in stats if they're standing within 3 spaces. These bonuses start off relatively small but gradually increase along with the relationship. These supports really help you get invested in these characters and this world, and makes it all the more painful should they die in battle. That pesky permanent that was around in the War series also came along when Fire Emblem was brought to the West. When a character's HP hits 0, they die. But surely there's a Phoenix down or some way to bring them back, right? Nope. Once they're dead, they stay dead. Unlike the War series, where the units are largely disposable, the characters here have you invested in them for both training them in battle and spending all that time nurturing their relationships with other characters. It makes you ask yourself, do I want to start over just to save a unit I put hours into, learning about their personality and developing them as a powerful ally? Or can I let go of one of my comrades and leave behind a friend who others likely got attached to? Resetting the game itself or continuing with one less ally, it's a difficult decision in choosing one option over the other. Once again, Fire Emblem's narrative and gameplay perfectly complements each other here. They test your ability as a strategist not to just get victory, but to do it without losing any of your favorite characters, or whether you're smart enough to salvage a mission after losing several of your best troops to some bad moves or dumb luck. There's very few rough edges to this fine title. If I have to nitpick, there is a part in chapter 28 and the final chapter where the game just automatically scrolls through the dialogue really slowly without letting you go through it like you normally can. It's not bad so much as it is just odd that it doesn't let you go through the dialogue faster than it does in these 2 specific spots in these 2 specific chapters. The one thing that Fire Emblem does fumble though is the tutorial. If you're wondering why I haven't mentioned Link's Tale yet, this is why. In order to properly discuss both Link's Tale and the problem it has, we're going to need to talk about the plot. Don't worry though, if you're afraid of having Link's Tale spoiled for you, just turn up the volume and skip ahead until you no longer see Minion, that's the character in the bottom right corner, on the screen. Once again, this is a spoiler warning. Spoilers! Alright, let's talk about Link's Tale. Link's Tale, while containing a story that appears to be self-contained, exists solely to be a tutorial for the main campaign and yeah, it's honestly really bad. The thing that you need to understand is that Lynn and her story were made to ease players into the series and get a better grip on the depth in tactical RPGs. This was, after all, the first Fire Emblem game to be released globally, and more specifically, released in North American territories. As such, it was made with an American audience in mind, hence the inclusion of the tutorial and the tactician in place to establish that you are not one of these characters. This also explains why Lyn and many of the other characters in the game don't reappear in Buenos Aires. They didn't exist when that game was made. Knowing all that, it doesn't change the fact that this is still a really bad tutorial. It holds your hand way too much until you've gone through it at least once. It is nice that if a unit does bite the dust in Lyn's tail, they will be available for the lengthier main game, but it doesn't make this hand-holding exercise any less annoying. And that's a shame because Lyn's story, while short, is quite possibly the definitive Fire Emblem experience from a narrative standpoint. Here's the amazing tale to Lyn's story. Are you ready for this? This is just gonna blow your mind. I mean, it's amazing. Lyn wants to see her grandfather. That's it. Lyn's tale is the most simplistic of the three and the shortest, but it's the most effective and emotional of the three. After discovering she's the heir to the Salem throne, Lyn wants to see the Marcus, her grandfather, before he is killed by his brother who plans to succeed the throne before Lyn can reach him. The premise is simple enough, the stakes are minimal, at least to our characters. I can't imagine the new Marcus wouldn't affect the political situation in Lycia, but that's not the main focus of the plot. The focus is on Lyn and her own struggles. It's the heartfelt tale of a young woman, alone after the slaughter of her tribe, the only family she's ever known, only to find out she has a grandfather, and sets out on a journey to meet the family she never knew she had, and stop her evil granduncle from killing him. It took something as simple as lonely girl finds family, and makes you want to see it through to the end alongside her. There's even a moment that made me well up a little, when Lyn meets her grandfather for the very first time. After all that she goes through, all the obstacles she's overcome, all the sacrifices that she's made, she finally sees the man himself for the very first time. But he doesn't recognize her, telling her to leave and let him die, not even opening his eyes to see her, but upon hearing her name, he realizes the mistakes he's made, opening his eyes to see his granddaughter for the very first time, and pours his heart out for all the wrong he's done to her and her family. It's one of the most touching moments I've seen in any game. Lyn's tale is the perfect introduction to Fire Emblem, and the quintessential Fire Emblem experience from a narrative standpoint. But no matter how superb the writing is, no matter how great the characters are, I simply can't deny that for all the things that Fire Emblem gets right, and it gets just about every single thing right, this was not a suitable tutorial for newcomers. It treats the player like they're a moron who doesn't understand the basic concept of move, unit, and attack. It may sound worse than I'm making it out to be, and it's entirely possible that this may not affect you if you ever play the game since the only way to get it at this point is use, but it still needs to be said that the one thing that Fire Emblem does get wrong is its tutorial. Every other aspect is pulled off with expertise and finesse that makes Fire Emblem the benchmark that I compare all other tactical RPGs to. Let us conclude this look back at Fire Emblem with the presentation. The graphics on the map and in battle have some simple sprite work, but they look wonderful, with fluid animation and charm in every pixel. Some characters even get an exclusive animation like Hawkeye and Lloyd. Other times, characters will have their portraits recycled, but they still do look good, with subtle attention to detail like different sizes to show how big or small a character is. It's also a nice touch that the color scheme of the characters in battle attempts to match the colors of the characters in cutscenes. And what can I possibly say about the music? Yuka Sugioka's score shines through, elegantly composing every note and crafting a truly beautiful score. This was the last game in the series which she was in charge of the music before leaving Intelligent Systems, and she sends the series off with a soundtrack to be remembered. New additions, old classics, from the very first note you hear, you know you're in for a spectacular showcase of what the Game Boy Advance was capable of. It may not be the largest soundtrack in series history, Seisen no Keifu still holds that record, nor is it the best, again, Seisen no Keifu, due to the system's terrible sound quality, but it is truly magnificent to just sit back and listen to the sweet notes played in every song. It is easily the best music to ever come out of the Game Boy Advance's scrappy sound chip. This is a soundtrack that you'll want to listen to with your headphones on. On the whole, Fire Emblem has stood the test of time and proudly stands among the best that the localized games have to offer. It's such a wonderful and unforgettable experience that may very well be my favorite game of all time. Copies can be found for around $30, and Fire Emblem is well worth that price, with 3 different campaigns to go through and a ton of content too. There's no shortage of fun to be had playing Fire Emblem. So why celebrate this date? What was the point in taking a look at the 7th entry in this series? Why not take a look at the very first game in the series instead of this, or reminisce about what Fire Emblem accomplished in its 10 years? Well, simply put, this title, unfortunately, set some very high bars that were never met by the entries to come after it. Not critically, the series has more than earned its reputation among players and critics, but rather commercially. Fire Emblem was, at the time, the highest selling game in the series, not only selling more in Western shores than it did in Japan, but almost reaching the 1 million mark, something no game did before and had done until Awakening. Over time, the series sales began to fall, and fall, and fall, to the point where it sold better in Japan, and as such, one of the games would not be released in North America. In a recent interview with the Spanish magazine Hobby Consoles, it was revealed that if Fire Emblem Awakening didn't sell well enough, it would be the last game in the series. And while it is important to celebrate its success and look forward to the future, it is equally important to take a look at the past and see where this series began for us Western folks, and see why this was the best-selling and highest-rated game in the series that saw a global release until Awakening. Without this game, there wouldn't be a Fire Emblem Awakening, no Shadow Dragon, no Sacred Stone, no Path of Radiance. None of these great titles would have ever reached our shores had it not been for Nintendo taking the risk that they did with having Intelligent System create and localize this game. So, with all that considered, I don't think it's unfair to say that this entry was the most important in the series for introducing as many people as it did to the series. It may not be the game that introduced me to the series, but I can definitely see why people did get interested in the series because of how great this one was. And so ends a celebration of this anniversary and look back at Fire Emblem. For 10 years, companions walked the endless road together in the West. Until next time, game on, my friends.